Want to be clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I am not a hero. I am a nurse. Those are different things. And the distinction matters. And I will keep making it for the rest of my life, regardless of how many plaques they want to hang on my wall. I work nights. I have worked nights for 19 years. First on a field rotation in the Kessler disputed zone, where the triage shifts ran 14 hours and nobody asked your rank, because rank didn't matter when someone was bleeding on your table, and then in the civilian sector, and then, by a sequence of bureaucratic accidents too dull to explain, on a 6-month interspecies medical exchange program to the Royal Palace of Thura. The exchange program was someone's very good idea executed with a certain amount of wishful thinking. The idea was sound. Human medicine and Veltharan medicine were similar enough in their fundamentals. A body, a fever, an infection, an intervention. But different enough in their specifics that cross-training could only help both sides. The wishful thinking was in the staffing. Program sent 3 of us. Dr. Aldrich Voss, senior physician, 12 years in xenobiology, who is going to lead the human contingent and establish the protocols. Dr. Priya Chaudhary, junior physician, 4 years out of residency, brilliant, terrifyingly capable, who was going to assist Dr. Voss and document the Veltharan surgical techniques, and me. I filled the overnight coverage gap. That was my formal function. I was there so that a human medical presence existed in the palace at all hours, because the exchange agreement required it. During the day, Dr. Voss and Dr. Chaudhary were in the palace clinic, meeting with the Veltharan physicians, conducting seminars, learning their pharmacopoeia, teaching hours. At night, from the 2nd bell to the 6th, I sat at a small desk in an anteroom off the palace medical wing, read patient files in a language I was still learning to parse, and waited to be needed. I was rarely needed. The Veltharan Royal household, the palace physicians, there were 11 of them, and they were excellent, ran a tight infirmary. For the first 2 months, the most significant thing I treated in the overnight hours was a palace guard who had bruised his shin on a decorative column and come in at the 3rd bell convinced he had broken something. He hadn't. I wrapped it. He thanked me with great formality and left. I was fine with that. I knew what I was there for, and covering a quiet night shift at an alien royal palace was not the hardest posting I had ever drawn. The palace itself was extraordinary, all pale crystal and warm stone, lit at night by arrays of small floating lights that drifted at ceiling height, like a slow orange fog, and the corridors were quiet enough that I could hear my own footsteps on the polished floors. I walked them often, on my breaks, because the exchange stipend included access to the palace grounds, and I have always thought better on my feet. There was a garden off the east wing that nobody seemed to use at night, a long colonnade open on one side to the sky, with raised planters along the inner wall. The corridor side was lit by the same drifting floating lights that ran throughout the palace, but the open side faced a quiet inner court that had no lights at all, so the garden existed in a stripe of warm and dark. Warm on the stone side, open night air on the other. It smelled good at most hours, better at night. Most of what grew there was ornamental, but some of it was medicinal. I had figured that out by the 3rd week, cross-referencing the plants against my Veltharan pharmacopoeia primer. The palace gardeners clearly kept the medicinal plots there for the physicians' convenience, and the physicians clearly didn't use them much, because most of what they needed came through the palace dispensary in pre-prepared form. I spent a lot of my break time in that garden. I learned what grew there. It was something to do, and I have always found that knowing what is available in a place is worth the time it takes to find out. Prince Sylvain fell ill on a Tuesday. I know this only because I wrote it in my shift log the following night, when the situation became clear enough to document. On the Tuesday itself, during daylight hours, I was asleep in my quarters and unaware. By the time I came on shift at the 2nd bell, Prince had already been under the care of the palace physicians for 14 hours, and the diagnosis, as Dr. Chaudhary briefed me at handoff, storm sickness. "What's storm sickness?" I asked. Priya shrugged in a way that told me she had asked the same question and gotten an unsatisfying answer. Veltharan catch-all for febrile illness of unknown origin in children. I've been trying to map it to a human equivalent, but physician Sivar isn't particularly interested in a comparative analysis right now. Physician Sivar was the palace's chief medical officer, a man of approximately 300 years of experience, and a manner that made Dr. Voss look like a first-year student. He was not discourteous to us. He was, however, politely and comprehensively certain that he did not require our assistance with a child's fever, and he communicated this certainty in the way that only people who have never had to question their own competence can communicate things. Complete, uncomplicated confidence. "How high is the fever?" I asked. 41.3 when I last checked, Priya said. "They're managing it with a compound called Sarath applied to the back of the neck. It's supposed to draw the heat outward. Is it working?" "Brought it down twice. It's been climbing again for the last 2 hours." I wrote this down, took my seat at the desk, and settled in. Prince Sylvain was 9 years old. He was the king's youngest. I had seen him twice in the corridors. A small silver-pale boy with dark violet eyes who moved through the palace with the self-possession of someone who had grown up inside its rhythms and knew where everything was. He at once, passing my anteroom door, looked in at me with the frank curiosity of a 9-year-old and asked me what I was doing. I told him I was reading. He asked what I was reading. I showed him the Pharmacopoeia primer. He looked at it for a long moment, then said that it had a lot of words for a book about plants, and went on his way. That was the extent of my acquaintance with the prince before he got sick. The first night passed without incident. The fever held at 41, dipped to 40.8 around the 4th bell, climbed back. I checked twice with the overnight nurse, a Veltheran woman named Isabel, who ran the night watch with a quiet efficiency I admired, and she was courteous but clearly did not require my input. The protocols were being followed. The Sarath was being applied. Prince was sleeping fitfully. In the morning, Dr. Voss arrived, conferred with physician Severon, and I was told that the situation was being managed appropriately. The second night was the same. The third was worse, 42.1, at the second bell, and when I looked in through the door of the prince's room, Isabel was replacing the treatment cloths on his neck with the focused movements of someone who has been doing this for hours, and is very carefully panicking. I went back to my desk. I read the case file such as it was. The notes were dense in technical Velthoran terminology that I was still only partially fluent in, and I spent 2 hours with my translation reference working through them. The diagnosis remained storm sickness. The treatment was Sirath oil, rest, light fluids, and what translated roughly as honor broth, a specific preparation made from a ceremonial stock that was served to ill members of the royal household. It was the traditional medicine, and tradition here carried the weight of 3,000 years of practice. I went back to reading. On the 4th night the king came down. I don't know what I expected King Orith Vel to look like at the 3rd bell with his youngest son burning in a room 20 meters away. What I saw was a man in a plain robe, no crown, no formal attire, just a pale gray cloth tied at the shoulder, who moved through the medical wing with the controlled precision of someone exercising a very large amount of discipline. He did not look at me when he passed the anteroom. He went to his son's room. He stayed for perhaps half an hour. When he came back out, he stood in the corridor for a moment, and in that moment his face was doing something complicated that I decided not to look directly. Then he saw me. "You are the human nurse," he said, not unkindly, just identifying me. "Yes, Marin Holt, I hold the overnight post." He looked at me for a moment. "You have reviewed my son's case." "I've read the file, Your Majesty. I'm not part of the treatment team. Are you familiar with storm sickness?" I considered how to answer that. "I'm not familiar with the term in its Veltharan clinical usage. I've read the notes. I don't have the same background in Veltharan physiology as my colleagues, so I'd be cautious about offering assessments." "Shh," he nodded slowly. "Physician Sivaron tells me the fever will break within the week. It is following the established progression." "I hope he's right," I said. It was a neutral answer. He heard something in it anyway. I could see it in the small pause before he inclined his head and moved on down the corridor. I had not meant to imply anything, but I had read that file, and I had spent 4 nights watching a 42-degree fever in a 9-year-old that was doing a particular thing I didn't entirely like. and I didn't have the vocabulary in Veltharan medicine to say what I was thinking, even if it had been my place to say it. I went back to my desk and thought about it for the rest of the night. On the fifth night, I knocked on the door of the overnight nurse's station and asked Thisabel if she could help me understand something in the file. She was a calm woman, Thisabel, with the patience that long-service nursing grows in everyone regardless of species, and she did not seem to resent the question. I showed her the section I was trying to parse, the dietary log. "This is what he has been eating," she said. "The honor broth at each meal, the sun-grain porridge in the morning, the spiced preparation at midday." I looked at the list. "The honor broth. Is this the preparation that uses the nightroot stock?" "Yes, it is the traditional." "The nightroot is the one I have here in my primer as a digestive stimulant," I said, showing her the page. "In adults. Is it used for children at this concentration?" Thisaville was quiet for a moment. "It is the traditional preparation for royal illness," she said. "The recipe has not changed in my lifetime." "I understand," I said. "I'm not questioning the tradition. I just want to make sure I understand the pharmacology correctly." "I can ask physician Sivaron," she said. She did not say it with any weight. She said it. "That would be helpful," I said. "Thank you." The answer came back third bell, via a note from the dispensary physician on call. The nightroot was a digestive stimulant in standard usage, but the honor broth preparation had been used for royal children in fever for more than 800 years without issue. The concentration was traditional. The note was polite and approximately the length of a small essay on the history of Veltharan royal medicine. I read it twice and thought about the 9-year-old in the room down the hall who had been eating the honor 3 times a day for 5 days while his fever climbed. Then I went and sat in the east garden for my break and looked at the medicinal plots. There was a plant in the third raised bed that I had identified in my second week on station. Low, dark-leafed, small, clustered flowers that closed at night. In my primer, it was listed under its Velthantharan name, which translated roughly as cooling leaf, and under its properties it said, antifungal, antimicrobial, mild febrifuge, traditionally used in steam preparations for respiratory complaints. It was not in the honor broth. It was not, as far as I could tell from the case file, being used in the prince's treatment at all. I sat with that for a long time. The thing was this: I did not know what was wrong with the prince. I did not have the Veltharan clinical background to make a definitive diagnosis of anything. What I had was 19 years of nursing experience, a lot of it in conditions where resources were limited, and you had to think carefully about what you knew and what you only thought you knew, torang, and a strong feeling that the fever following every meal was a pattern that deserved more attention than the case file was giving it. I was a night nurse in an anteroom. I was not part of the treatment team. Physician Sivaron had 11 physicians and 300 years of experience. Dr. Voss was the senior human medical presence, and he had 12 years in xenobiology. If either of them had flagged the dietary correlation, I had not heard about it. Maybe they had seen it and ruled it out. Maybe there was a reason for it that I didn't understand because I was still learning the language. Maybe I was pattern matching incorrectly, and the meal timing was coincidental. I went back inside and wrote up 3 pages of notes. Questions, not conclusions. The timing of the fever spikes mapped against the dietary log. The composition of the honor broth, and the interaction between nightroot as a digestive stimulant and the body of a 9-year-old fighting an existing infection. The cooling leaf in the third bed and the note in the primer about steam preparations for respiratory complaints, which I had noted because during the second night I had heard the prince coughing in a particular way that I recognized, if I was honest, the field. I wrote the notes, and I put them in the exchange team's shared file where Dr. Voss would see them in the morning. And I went and knocked on Thisabel's door again. "I have a question that isn't clinical," I said. "If I wanted to ask the prince something, just a conversation, would that be acceptable while he's awake?" Thisabel looked at me for a moment. "He has been awake for the last 2 hours," she said. "The fevers make sleep difficult." She paused. "What would you want to ask him?" "What he would like to eat," I said. She was quiet for longer this time. "That is not typically." "I understand," I said. "I'll defer to whatever the protocol says. But if you think it's acceptable." She considered it. Then she said, "I will come with you." We went in together. The prince was propped on the sleeping platform. They did it differently here. Low to the floor, with raised cushioned sides, and he was awake. And he looked very simply like what he was. A sick child who had been sick for 5 days and would like to be done with it. His silver-pale skin had taken on a grayish cast that I did not think was normal for Veltherin, and his dark violet eyes were fever-bright and a little glassy, but they sharpened when he saw me. "You're the human nurse," he said. The same words his father had used, in the same tone his father had used, and I wondered if the apple had fallen close to the tree. "I am. I hope it's all right that I came to see you." "I'm not asleep," he said, as if that resolved the question. "I can see that." I moved to the side of the sleeping platform and crouched down so I was at his level. Isabel stood near the door. "I wanted to ask you something, if that's all right." He looked at me with the evaluating gaze of a child who is not feeling well enough to perform politeness, and so is simply being direct. "All right, what do you want to eat?" I asked. He stared at me. Then he said flatly, "Not the broth." I kept my face neutral. "What would you like instead?" "Something plain," he said. "The broth has a taste. When I'm not sick, I don't mind it. When I'm sick, it's too heavy." He paused. "I told Physician Severon. He said the honor broth is what is given." "When did you tell him?" "The second day." I nodded. "All right," I said. "Thank you. I hope you can sleep a little." I stood up. He watched me. "Are you going to do something?" he asked. "I'm going to write some more notes," I said. "And I'm going to sit at my desk and think. That's what I do at night." He seemed to find this a satisfactory answer because he let his eyes close. In the morning, Dr. Voss read my notes. He found me in the handoff room at the 6th bell when I was finishing my shift documentation, and he stood in the doorway with the look he wore when he was carefully calibrating how to say something. Dr. Voss was a good physician and a careful man. He had spent 12 years studying species for whom medicine and diplomacy were woven together in ways that were not always easy to unpick, and he understood better than I did the particular difficulty of being a guest professional in a house that had its own centuries of practice. He was also very conscious of the diplomatic dimensions of the exchange program, in a way that had occasionally, in my observation, made him slower to act than he might otherwise have been. I did not fault him for this. The exchange program's continuity required someone to hold those pieces together, and that person was him, not me. "You think the dietary correlation is significant," he said. "I think it's worth asking about," I said. "The honor broth has been used for royal children for 800 years. "I know." Physician Severon has already noted the timing. His assessment is that the post-meal spikes are related to the bod inflammatory response to digestion during fever, which is documented in Veltherin pathology. I said, "That's a reasonable explanation. But you don't think that's what it is?" Was quiet for a moment. "I think it might be a feedback loop. The infection is the night root in the broth, acting as a digestive stimulant when the gut is already stressed, driving the inflammatory cycle up at each meal. Not the cause, but making it harder to break. I might be wrong. I don't know Veltherin physiology the way you do." He looked at the notes for a long moment. "I'll raise it with Severon," he said, diplomatically. "I know," I said. I went to sleep. I don't know what was said between Dr. Voss and Physician Severon that day. What I know is that on the 6th night, the honor broth was still being served. I know this because I checked the dietary log when I came on shift, and it was there. Honor broth, midday, honor broth evening. I sat with that for a while. Then I went and found Isabel. "The prince asked for plain food," I said. "On the 5th night he told me the broth is too heavy when he's sick." He told Physician Severon the same thing on the 2nd day. "The honor broth is the prescribed preparation," Isabel said. Her voice was even. "Physician Severon is the chief physician." "I understand," I said. "I'm not asking you to change anything. I just want to know. If I made plain broth, very simple, clear stock, none of the night root compounds, and brought it myself outside the formal dietary protocol, would that be something I could offer him? My own food, my own rations, not a medical intervention. Just a person bringing a child something to eat." Isabel was very still for a moment. Then she said, "The exchange agreement provides that human staff may offer their own food to the prince if the prince consents." "Yes," I said. "It does." "You have read the exchange agreement very carefully," she said. I read it on the first night, I said. I had a lot of time. There was a pause that might, in a different context, have been the space where someone decided whether to like me. Then Thisabel said, "Ask the prince if he wishes to receive food from you." She came back 7 minutes later and said he did. Cooked it in the small exchange team kitchen on the floor above the medical wing. Clear water, the palace's plain grain stock which I had located in the kitchen stores, salt, nothing else. It took 20 minutes. I put it in a ceramic bowl, the shallow kind that sat stable on a flat surface, and I carried it down. He drank about half of it. He said it was better. I came back 2 hours later and he drank the rest. On the 7th night I brought the bowl again, and I also brought, in my pocket, a folded cloth and a small glass vessel I had borrowed from the dispensary. After he had eaten, and he was propped up, and this was the second thing, the thing I had been most tentative about. On the 6th night I had asked, very carefully, if he could be helped to sit slightly more upright while he slept, because human respiratory practice during fever involved involved elevation, and I wanted to see if it helped his breathing. This Avil had agreed to try it. She had not said so in terms of clinical endorsement. She had simply adjusted the cushions to the angle I suggested, and checked his temperature 40 minutes later, and written the reading in her log, without comment. That was how Thisabel communicated agreement. I had come to understand this. His cough was different on the 7th night. Not gone, different. Less wet. The kind of cough that means the airways are clearing rather than fighting. I had heard that sound enough times in enough difficult postings that I trusted it the way you trust a landmark. It didn't mean you were home. It meant you were pointed in the right direction. I took the glass vessel and the folded cloth, and I went to the east garden. The colonnade was empty as always. At this hour, the small, floating lights at the corridor ceilings casting their drifting orange glow into the outer passage but not quite reaching the open side, so the garden was lit only by the ambient sky glow of the city, beyond the palace walls and the faint luminescence that the cooling leaf plants gave off naturally at night. A soft blue-white at the leaf edges, barely visible, kind of thing you only see if you are standing quietly with your eyes adjusted. I had noticed it in the 3rd week. It was the only bioluminescent plant in the 3rd bed, and it had been the first one I had mapped in my primer notes. I picked a careful amount. I had been checking the plant every night for 2 weeks. I knew how much was there, and how much the Velthoren pharmacy equivalent called for in steam preparations. And I brought it back inside and I put it in a basin of warm water from the dispensary tap and I placed the basin near the head of his sleeping platform, just at the edge, the folded cloth draped over the top to hold the steam. "What is that?" he asked. "Something from the garden," I said. "It's in your own pharmacopoeia. I just thought the steam might help you breathe a little easier. Is that all right?" He looked at it. "It smells like the East Garden at night," he said. "It does," I said. "I spend my breaks out there." He lay back down. After a moment he said, "Why do you spend your breaks in the garden?" "I like to know what's growing," I said, "in case it's useful." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, almost to himself, "All the physicians just talk about what I have. You're the first one who asked what I wanted." I didn't say anything to that. I sat with it, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it into something bigger than it needed to be. I stayed until the 4th bell. The fever sat at 41.2. It hadn't dropped, not yet, but it had stopped climbing. That was a different thing. The king came down again at the 5th bell. I heard him in the corridor before I saw him. The same quiet, controlled steps. He looked through the door of his son's room, and then he looked at me in the anteroom, and he came and stood in the doorway. "He is sleeping," he said. "Yes," I said. "He went down around the 3rd bell, the fever. 41.2 when I last checked. It's been stable for about 4 hours. He looked at me for a long moment. "Stable is not lower." "No," I said. "But stable is better than climbing." He was quiet. I thought he was going to go, but he didn't. He stood in the doorway and looked at nothing in particular, and I had the distinct sense that this was a man who had been bearing something for 7 nights, and was very tired of bearing it alone, and did not know how to put it down. "How long have you been a nurse?" he asked. 19 years. "Have you worked with sick children before?" "Often," I said. "I did a field rotation early in my career. A lot of displaced families, limited resources. I worked with a lot of sick children. Was this common? He asked. This kind of fever. I considered the question carefully. Something like it, I said. I'm being cautious, because I don't know Veltharan physiology the way your physicians do, and I don't want to claim more certainty than I have. But I've seen this pattern before in humans. The fever that won't break because the body is fighting on two fronts at once, and sometimes one of those fronts is the treatment itself. Sometimes the body just needs to be given less to fight, not more. He was very still. You believe the honor broth is complicating his recovery. I believe the plain broth I've been bringing him is going down better, I said, and that his cough sounds different tonight than it did on the 5th night. I could be wrong about the reason. Those are the things as I've observed. Another long quiet. Then carefully, Physician Severon is a physician of great experience. I know, I said. I'm not disputing his assessment. I'm a night nurse sitting at a desk in an anteroom. I don't have his experience or his training. I just have what I've observed. And what have you observed? That your son asked for plain food on the 2nd day and told Physician Severon it, too heavy, and the honor broth kept coming. And that, when I brought the plain broth on the 6th night, he drank all of it. And that tonight he told me I was the first person who asked what he wanted. The king was quiet for a long time. I watched him not look at anything in particular. The way people look when they are processing something they should have known and did not. He was not a man who wore his feelings plainly. I had gathered that much from our few late-night exchanges. He was a king and a father, and in my observation, those two things require a person to be very good at keeping their face composed, because the people around them are always watching. But it was the 5th bell in a quiet medical wing, and his youngest son had a fever that had now been climbing for 7 days, and the composed face was doing its work imperfectly. He told you that tonight, he said. Not quite a question. He did. He has not complained, not to me, not to the staff. He paused. He is 9 years old. He knows that complaint is not. He stopped. Started again, more carefully. In our household, when a child is ill, the adults make the decisions. The physicians direct the care. Protocol exists for a reason. Yes, I said. And yet he told a stranger. I'm the night nurse, I said. I'm nobody in particular. That might be why. He looked at me with something that was not unkindness but was not warmth either. More like the expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he had mapped correctly. You are not nobody, he said. You are the person sitting here at the 5th bell. I did not answer that. There was nothing useful to add. He went back to his son's room, and I didn't see him again until morning. On the 8th night, the honor broth was not in the dietary log. I read the log 3 times to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I looked at the nursing notes for the day. There was a brief entry, in Physician Severon's hand, noting that the dietary protocol had been adjusted on consultation with the royal household to better support the patient's appetite. No further detail. I thought about that for a while. Then I decided that the only thing that mattered was that it was gone, and went on with my shift. I brought the clear broth at the 1st bell. The prince was more awake than I had seen him in 3 nights. His color was better, the grayish undertone had lessened, and the violet eyes were clearer. He drank the bowl without stopping. Better? I asked. Better, he said. He handed me back the bowl. Is the steam thing helping? What do you think? I asked. He considered. My chest feels less like there's something sitting on it, he said. There was something sitting on it for a long time. I nodded. I was making mental notes. The cough had changed significantly on the 7th night. Less wet, productive. And if I was reading the pattern correctly, the worst was past. How much longer? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think your body has stopped fighting itself. That means the work it's doing now is real work, not wasted work. That usually goes faster. He looked at me with that direct, evaluating gaze. You talk to me like I'm not a child. You told me on the 5th night that the broth was too heavy. You were right, I said. That earned you some straight talk. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when I'm better, can I see the garden? The plants you use. They're your plants, I said. Grow in your garden. You can see them whenever you like. Something eased in his face then. Not the fever, that was still there. Something else. Something that had been tightened up for 8 days. He fell asleep around the 2nd bell. Sat at my desk and wrote notes. and listened to the palace breathe around me in the night. The floating lights drifted overhead in the corridor. Somewhere in the east wing, a window was open to the night air, and I could smell the garden, faintly, through the whole building. The cool leaf and the night-blooming ornamentals and the clean stone smell of the colonnade. At the third bell I heard it. From down the corridor, from the prince's room. A laugh. Small, brief. The kind of laugh that escapes before you can catch it. The kind a sick child makes when something strikes them funny in a dream. One small sound in a quiet building, and then quiet again. I set down my pen. 30 seconds later, I heard footsteps in the outer corridor. Different footsteps, heavier, coming quickly from the direction of the royal apartments. I already knew who it was before the king appeared in the door of the anteroom. He stopped when he saw me. He laughed, he said. His voice was very controlled. I heard it too, I said. He stood there for a moment, with the look of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for 8 nights, and does not quite know what to do now that the weight has shifted. Then he went to his son's room. He was in there for a long time. When he came out, he stopped again at the anteroom door. The fever, he said. I haven't checked since before the laugh, I said. I was going to give him a little more time. His color is better. I thought so too. The king looked at me with an expression I did not know how to read exactly. Not gratitude. Something more complicated than gratitude. Something with edges on it. What you did, he said. I want to understand what you did. I asked him what he wanted to eat, I said. And I spent some time in the garden. That is not all you did. It's most of it, I said. The rest was paying attention. That's what nurses do at night. We pay attention. The physicians do the diagnosing. We sit with people in the dark and notice things. He was quiet for a long moment. Will you check his fever now? I got up and went down the hall and checked. 39.4. Came back and told him. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he opened them and he was King Orth Vel again. Thank you, he said. I went back to my desk and wrote it all down. The fever broke entirely by the 4th bell. I logged it and left the note for Thisavelle and Dr. Chaudhary. By the time I came back on shift the following night, the prince was sitting up and eating solid food and had, according to the day nurses, asked 3 separate staff members whether they knew what was growing in the East Garden. Dr. Voss found me on the 8th night handoff. He said physician Sivaron had reviewed the complete notes and agreed, in retrospect, that the digestive component had likely been a complicating factor in the fever's persistence. He said it with the careful phrasing of a man who had brokered something delicate and was presenting the outcome as a collaborative success, and I appreciated that, because it was the right way to handle it. The exchange program needed to keep going after I left. Whatever had happened in that room between physician Severon and his own clinical record, it wasn't my business to weigh in on it. I said that was good to hear and asked if there was anything new in the overnight patient files. There wasn't. 3 weeks later, the exchange program's posting rotation cycled, and we moved to the secondary clinic on the eastern administrative floor. I packed my kit and my pharmacopoeia primer and my 3 notebooks and went where I was sent. I kept the small glass vessel. I had cleaned it out and returned the loan to the dispensary, but the dispensary clerk had said to keep it. I've never been sure if that was his decision or someone else's. The last week of the 6-month program came faster than I expected. Dr. Voss was being asked to extend his posting. Dr. Chaudhary was in serious negotiation with the Veltherin Medical Institute about a joint research project on comparative immunology. I was rotating back to my standard Earthside contract at the end of the month, the way I always did, because that was the job. On the penultimate day, the King's Chamberlain found me at the hangar bay where I was sitting with my bags, waiting for the morning shuttle that would take me to the transit station. I will be honest, first thought was that there was a problem with my clearance. The king requests your presence before your departure, the Chamberlain said. I looked at my bags and then at the shuttle schedule display on the wall. When? Now, if convenient. It was not especially convenient. You do not tell a King's Chamberlain that. I left my bags in the care of the hangar logistics officer, a Veltherin woman who had my itinerary, memorized and assured me with complete seriousness that the shuttle would wait. And I followed the Chamberlain back through the palace. He brought me to the outer courtyard. which I had passed through many times, but always at the edges. The center of the courtyard had a wide expanse of pale stone that I had always assumed was ceremonial. And I was right, because it was. The king was there. His household was there. 25 people, in their formal attire, lined up along the edges of the stone. Thisavelle was there. The head dispensary physician was there. Physician Savar On was there, standing with his colleagues, his face its usual composed arrangement, and Prince Onfian was there. He was standing beside his father, and he looked like himself again, the silver-pale, straight-backed, direct-eyed boy I had seen once in a corridor 2 months ago. He was wearing formal attire, not the pale, sick clothes of the last 8 nights, and he was watching me come across the courtyard with that evaluating gaze. I stopped in front of the king. I did not know what the correct formal behavior was in this situation, and I decided that the most honest thing I could do was stand straight and look at him directly, which was what I had done every night in that anteroom, and it had seemed to work. Marin Holt, the king said, "Turf of the Human Exchange Program." "Yes," I said. "I have been informed that the appropriate title for your work is not Nurse of the Exchange," he said. "That it is, in the proper Veltharan recognition form, Physician to the royal household. I am told this is the highest clinical appointment the crown can bestow." He paused. "I am told the humans in your medical system have a similar framework, and that this appointment would constitute something you call a full consulting rank." "I believe that's correct," I said carefully. "I am offering it to you," he said. "Formally and on the record as of today, permanent post at the palace, at full rank. The terms are yours to set." Stood there and thought about the anteroom and the night shift desk, and the East Garden and 19 years of overnight rotations in places where no one asked your rank, because rank didn't matter when someone was bleeding on your table. I thought about the 9-year-old who had told me I was the first person who asked what he wanted. I thought about my bags in the hangar bay, with my pharmacoa primer and my 3 notebooks and the small glass vessel from the dispensary and the shuttle schedule that was, according to the logistics officer, waiting for me. "Your Majesty," I said, "that is an extraordinary honor, and I am genuinely grateful for it," he said. He had been listening to me at night for 8 nights. He heard what was coming. "But my contract is with the exchange program, and the exchange program is what brought me here. And if I stay, I'm one less nurse in a rotation that is already short. Your physicians are excellent. Physician Severon knows now what to watch for. Thisavelle knows the rest." I stopped. What I did was not extraordinary medicine. It was 9-year-old medicine. Ask the patient what he wants and listen to the answer. Your physicians know how to do that. I just happened to be the one sitting at the desk at night with enough time to notice. The king was quiet. Sylvain was watching me with that direct, solemn, unreadable expression. "If there is a posting in the exchange program again," I said, "come back." The king nodded slowly. "That can be arranged," he said. "I will personally ensure that it is arranged." Then he did something I had not been briefed on and had not expected. He bowed to me, a full Veltharan formal bow. I had seen it twice in my 6 months here, both times in diplomatic contexts, hands open at the sides, head inclined at a precise angle that the Chamberlain had explained to me in week 2 indicated equality between parties. Not subordination, not thanks given downward. Equality, the bow you gave to someone whose rank matched yours. I did not know what to do with my hands. The household bowed. All 25 of them, in unison, the same bow. Physician Sever On and Thival, and the dispensary clerk and the diplomatic staff and the king's chamberlain. Prince Sylvain bowed last. He held it for a moment longer than the others. When he straightened up, he caught my eye, and he said, not formally, just for me, the way he had spoken in the anteroom in the dark, "Thank you for the garden." I got through it. I do not entirely remember how. I remember the chamberlain walking me back to the hangar bay, and I remember that the logistics officer looked at me with what I think was knowing amusement and said the shuttle was indeed still waiting, and I remember sitting down in my seat and looking out the small oval window at the pale crystal towers of the palace receding as we lifted. I thought about Thisavelle, who had let me into that room without being asked to. I thought about the dispensary clerk who had said to keep the glass vessel and what that small gesture had cost him in terms of protocol. and whether he had cleared it with someone or simply made the call himself. I thought about physician Seaver on, standing in that courtyard with his colleagues, bowing, and what it meant for a man of 300 years' experience to bow to a night nurse from a 6-month exchange program, and whether he had found a way to hold that in a form that was useful to him, or whether it would just sit uncomfortably for a while. I hope the former. He was a good physician. He had simply been certain in a situation that required a little uncertainty, and that is a thing that happens to good physicians as often as it happens to anyone else. I thought about the 9-year-old who had said, in the plain honest voice of a sick child with nothing left to spend on performance, "All the physicians just talk about what I have. You're the first one who asked what I wanted." That stayed with me. It stays with me still. Here is what I know about nursing 19 years in. The medicine is important. The pharmacopoeia matters, the diagnostics matter, the treatment protocol matters. I am not diminishing any of it. Somewhere in every long illness, in every long night, there is a moment when the medicine has done what it can do for now, and what remains is a person in a bed who is tired and frightened and has been talked at rather than talked to for long enough that they have given up trying to say what they actually need. And in that moment, the most useful tool in the room is not a drug or a procedure. It is someone sitting down and asking the plain question. I am not a hero, I am a nurse. I asked a question, and I sat with the answer, and I picked some leaves from a garden. That is the whole of what I did. But I sat with him in the dark when the building was quiet, and I listened, and he knew it. Sometimes that is enough to change the direction of a thing. I have the glass vessel on my desk at home. It sits next to my pharmacopoeia primer, the one I annotated in the margins during all those night breaks in the East Garden. On the inside back cover, in my own handwriting, I made a list of everything growing in that garden by Veltherin name, and by the closest human equivalent I could find. It is not a heroic list. It is just plants, and what they're good for, and how much to use. That is what I have to show for 8 nights in an anteroom. I think that is enough.